Hey guys, welcome back to the Kinzer Mind and Body podcast. Today we have a slightly different formatted episode. I posted an IG story asking you guys to send me a bunch of questions in the form of voice notes for me to answer. So I'm going to spend the next 20, 30, or however many minutes answering your guys' questions. And if you guys like this format and enjoy today's episode, just don't be afraid to leave a comment letting me know. Without further ado, let's get right into it.
How to differentiate between feelings and attachment.
That's an interesting question. I guess it would depend on how we look at it because attachment doesn't always actually include feelings, and feelings don't always include attachment either, because you can feel very strongly towards someone and also practice detachment. And I think what we're expecting from detachment as a practice is for those feelings to sort of disappear. And in the same way, we still feel as though we care about a person. But detachment really is just a bunch of choices over and over to not try to control someone and to let a flower be a flower, as I always say, and let a bird be a bird. We allow people to be as they are. We don't try to control or trap them. So if you're looking to differentiate between feelings and attachment, I'd actually say put the feelings aside, because a lot of times you can't really control feelings. So acknowledge whatever feelings are present, and then in terms of attachment, how much of your happiness is sort of dependent on maybe that text back from them, how much of your happiness and peace of mind is dependent on them sort of acting in a validating way in which they always do. And these things aren't inherently bad, but it's important to note that that's kind of what the string of attachment looks like. It's when a relationship or any sort of dynamic is sort of tied by a string, and that string, when pulled, can completely alter your emotional state. So if you're looking to balance and maybe have a more healthy attachment rather than a sort of compulsive emotional attachment, I would say just let the person be as they are. Don't try to control them. Don't try to make them feel a certain way. Don't try to make them talk or act a certain way. You let them be as you are, and you enjoy the relationship or whatever dynamic that may exist, and you enjoy it as it is rather than anything else you would want it to be. Good question though. Let's check out the next one.
Hello, Kinzer. How does one differentiate between their programming and their conscious mind? That's the main question. But if I need to get into detail, the desires and the wants that we are taught up until adulthood versus when we are in adulthood, the cord has been cut, the umbilical cord has been cut, and now we get to face the fork in the road. Do I still agree with what I was taught to want and desire, or do I want to choose this exploratory path of what I think I want? What is true?
It's interesting that you ended that question with what is true, because I think what the basis of what you're asking is, how do I differentiate the sort of soul seeking conscious exploration from my sort of ego and personal conditioning? And the answer is that the conditioning is going to exist anyway. Even if we frame it from a sort of philosophical or spiritual narrative, that conditioning is going to exist anyway. So it's not necessarily about separating the conditioning, but how can we sort of condition ourselves in a way where our life is now meeting and satisfying what we feel is the truest essence of who we are. Because when we're looking for truth of this self, the self starts to evaporate, right? Because truth is in awareness, it's in presence, it's in understanding and experiencing the self. So I think when you're looking at it from a sort of conscious exploration standpoint, you need to sort of craft and condition yourself in a way where the self is now serving you in a way rather than being a hindrance. So a lot of times what we need to do first is break that sort of old conditioning. And the reason we need to do that is because we didn't choose who to be, and we didn't choose how to be conditioned. So when we actually consciously choose what we're feeding our minds, the actions that we're repeatedly doing, and sort of the decisions we're consciously making with sort of intentional emotions behind them, suddenly conditioning actually becomes a sort of system and working framework for us to better understand our true wantings and our sort of true desires. But yeah, if you're going to look for truth, the truth will bring you into nothingness. So I think searching for truth of who you are can be realized right now. All you have to do is close your eyes, ignore your thoughts, and follow your breath. The nothing that exists, the pure awareness and experiencing of the very present moment. That's the truth. But we didn't come here just to experience that. We came here to experience how we as awareness manifest as consciously a soul in a way. That's the way you can frame it. So what we need to do is transform ourselves in a way that creates an easier gateway process for us to get as close as we can to experiencing a valid representation of our soul. We get as close as we can because the truth will lead us back to the center in the beginning every time.
Kinzer, it's Jake here. Big fan of yours. You've definitely helped me a lot over the years. I'm just curious, how long did it take you to gather all of this information and start implementing it into your life? It's pretty fascinating, just the amount of knowledge that you've gathered over the years. So, just curious how you learned it all and how it's impacted your life. Anyways, big fan, man. Keep going.
This is a good question, and I actually get this question a lot, and I'm sort of torn on how to answer it because I can give a typical answer in saying that I read a lot of books, I watched a lot of videos, and I did a lot of reflecting, but I feel like that would be slightly remiss because I don't have 50 to 60 years of experience and years worth of meditation under my belt. I think it's more of a fact of I've somehow become even remotely slightly attuned into understanding more difficult concepts and maybe being able to elaborate them in a more simple way, a more digestible and sort of practical way. Because I think a lot of the sort of maybe knowledge that has been passed down throughout the years or by many teachers, it sort of ages with the time, if you know what I mean. So a teaching that was applied 100 years ago and the way that it was framed, it might not be quite understandable and digestible in today or the modern world. So I think what maybe many of you are relating to is rather a sort of translating of knowledge rather than a sort of library of knowledge that I have to myself. And in the second part, how has it impacted my life? I have seen impacts in my life in the very ways in which I tell you to impact your life. So in a very practical, real way, I've seen improvements from things such as neuroplasticity and, plasticity and showing the mind through action and observing thought and not feeding thoughts. And these are things that I've seen real change. I've seen physical change. And, if you want to say change from a more maybe spiritual perspective, I think that's when things get a little bit weird and interesting, but we can dive into that in another time. All I'll say is with the sort of openness and surrendering to these sort of principles and, the more I write and the more I share, the more synchronistic, I guess, things start to appear and the more it feels like I'm supported in whatever this journey that I'm on with you guys, whatever it may be. It starts to become very synchronistic, I think is the best way to put it. But yeah, in terms of knowledge, if you want the very ground rooted answer, a lot of reading, a lot of reflecting, and most of all, a lot of learning from my own frustrations and looking for a logical way out instead of a rhetorical one, because I think that's what happens to a lot of us is we're feeling a sense of misery. And when we go on YouTube or we're looking at books, there's so many ideas, there's so many metaphors, and no one, well, I'm not going to say no one, but very few teachers and the good teachers, they tell you exactly what to do. And the problem with telling you what to do is you need an understanding of both the human brain psychologically and you need an understanding of the sort of philosophic spiritual will of a human and purpose driven and how to connect with them through story. And those are two different things that are sort of hard to merge and digest. And now, in a time when everyone is so quick to sort of consume content and things, you need to be able to make things digestible and practical immediately. Someone needs to be able to see 30 seconds of wisdom and not just ponder it, they need to actually be able to apply it in their lives. And I think that's what real modern knowledge has come to, and that's what people are seeking now more than ever. Great question.
Hey, Kinzer. So, as someone who's beginning to form that belief that they are not their thoughts, they are not their mind, obviously it's not cemented for me just yet. So, I have my challenging days where I do associate with them and I give them meaning and whatnot. But with the help of this account and also your podcast, I've been doing a lot better with, creating that separation. But my question is, what about the voice in our heads that we all have? Like, is that us? Is that like my soul speaking? Or is that like also not mine? And I can become more of an observer of that. It's something that I kind of struggle with sometimes, especially when that voice becomes kind of negative and, I kind of go back and forth with it. I guess my question is how can I become a better observer of the voice and not associate with it so much and kind of create that separation?
This is a great question, and I appreciate your honesty. I think the way you frame it is very relatable, and it reminds me of me when I was probably at that exact stage. So something stood out to me, and I think it may actually help you right away, and that is you're still sort of holding on to a sort of perspective of the brain that is that the voice, let's frame it as the language model, the word model that is in your mind is somehow in any way distinctive of who you are. If you spoke a different language, you would think in a different language. If you were never taught language, you wouldn't think in language. So those words that you're hearing, that's brain stuff. That is the brain sort of firing and reacting in a sort of biological feedback way. The voice in your mind, it's not you. Even though you may feel well represented at times by that voice, it's because it's very well adjusted to creating a feedback loop based on your emotional reactions to the voice in your mind. And I'm not going to tell you that you need to be completely void of that voice in your mind to have freedom. But the simple realization and real belief that you sort of need to understand is that that voice is not an intelligent force. That voice is actually closer to almost like a brain fart. Even when you think you come up with a brilliant idea or an amazing thing to say, there's a deeper sort of intelligence and brain processing that is happening. What you're talking about is a conversation with yourself because you are the awareness. And you already know this. You stated it in your question. You are the observer. So when you ask, how do I become a better observer? Realize that your essence, who you truly are, will never communicate with you in words because you are awareness. You are the observer. In another sense, you could say this. Your soul doesn't speak English. Your soul doesn't speak English. So if what these thoughts are doing to bother you is they're making predictions about the future or they're telling you things that you don't want to believe, you have to realize that this isn't you telling yourself this. This is brain chemistry and a sort of mental algorithmic loop that is happening. And the only reason it's happening is because of your emotional investment in whatever you're hearing in your mind. Those words are completely just noise. Even if they sound intelligent, even if they crack a joke, even if what they say is disturbing, they're just noise. They're just like a burp. They're a fart. It's a biological reaction. So the main thing that you're probably dealing with right now, that I was dealing with for a very long time, is you're still holding on to that thread of belief. It's because we were taught from very young to believe this, that you are your thoughts. That voice in your head, any voice, any words, any language that is in your mind is in any way a depiction of who you are in the deepest essence. When you're living your life and you're present and you're existing and you're flowing and you feel good and you almost forget to think, that's who you are, really. Or I guess that's the closest we can become to who we are, because we're not thinking about who we are. We're just being who we are. So what's needed is you can find the peace that you're looking for, that you're searching for right now. And it's not because the thoughts are going to disappear tomorrow. It's because you just have to really understand that no thought is representative of you. Zero. Not a single one. Positive ones are nice. They're fun to play with. They're fun to imagine things and to sort of affirm certain things about us. And we could use that in a weird, tricky way to sort of help our mental state. But if you're dealing with negative thoughts and racing thoughts on the regular, you need to remove complete belief from the thoughts whatsoever. Just remember, your soul, your awareness, your observer state, it doesn't speak English. It doesn't speak any language. It doesn't speak in words. It just is. I hope that helps. Great question.
First of all, congrats on your success, and thank you for being so brave and sharing consistently on this page that you've grown for over the last couple of years. You know, there's a point in my life last year I was seeing your post pop up daily, and you know, those daily affirmations got me a long way. So seriously, bottom of my heart, thank you. Anyways, my question to you is: right now in my life, I have a lot of anxiety, and I bought your book. I just haven't read it yet. But in regards to anxiety, what's the process of, you know, taming the anxiety? Like, what is the middle ground of, you know, okay, I'm improving with my anxiety. How do you know that your anxiety isn't as bad as it used to be, say, like a month or two? Like, how do you kind of like jot your anxiety down? What would you suggest for that?
This is an important question, and I guess it of course depends on, you know, the type of anxiety we're talking about, the type of fears that are lingering, and the type of sort of actions you're taking to reinforce that anxiety and maybe even avoid it. But I would say I'll answer sort of the central question you put at the end, which is, how do I know when I'm making progress? And that's a really important one, because if we don't know that we're making progress, sometimes it can feel like we're moving backwards. But specifically for all of you who are listening, I want you to think in your life of the choices you make. And there's often two sort of choices, two things that come up. The first one is your immediate reaction to something. Oh, there's a social event. Oh yeah, why wouldn't I go? All my friends are going. And then the anxiety creeps in. Who's going to be there? What are they going to think of me? Oh, I shouldn't wear this. Oh, maybe I just won't go. You know, and now what choice do we make as the result of our mental activity? Do we observe the anxiety, push through the discomfort, the mental thoughts, and the physical discomfort that we're experiencing? Because, of course, you can feel it in both your body and your mind. Do we push through that discomfort and do what we know deep in our heart we just want to do if it weren't for anxiety? Or do we listen to anxiety and take an action rooted in avoidance? We take the safe action, the more comfortable one. And how you'll make progress is you can mark these checkpoints when you don't listen to anxiety. You have to ask yourself consistently, if anxiety weren't a factor, what would I do right now? How would I walk in this room? How would I speak to this person? How would I hold a conversation? How would I make plans? That's what I really want from myself when I'm approaching, and that's what I really want from you guys as well, because there's so many layers of things that are happening when we're taking actions while recognizing the anxiety, but not giving life to it in a way where our decisions are made because anxiety scared us into that choice. This choice, when we make a choice that is rooted in anxiety, we're of course feeding anxiety. And don't get anxious about that either. I mean, you're not going to dig yourself deeper in the hole because you already know how that feeling feels. But the thing that you probably don't really experience too often is the discomfort of pushing through it. In pushing through it, you grow a tolerance to that anxiety. So you expand your level of tolerance. It's almost like a spice tolerance. If you've never eaten spicy food, your tolerance might be really bad and your tongue might be on fire and you might be racing for water. And the same thing is what happens is when you slowly keep making decisions rooted in anxiety, your tolerance for discomfort in many of these situations goes way down. So now you're very limited. You're limited to what anxiety lets you do. So you'll know you're making progress when you're no longer listening to anxiety's opinion on what you should do, and rather you're observing the anxiety, you're feeling it, you're moving through it, and you're listening to your real wanting. You go to that social event, you hold that conversation, you speak to that person because that's what you want to do. And the only thing that was standing in your way is the opinion of anxiety, the opinion which we need to overcome.
Hey, I just wanted to know how one goes with the flow of life and trusting the process and not looking to the future and or whatever may seem to happen or like whatever happens. Just how to go with the flow and not look at the future because my mind tells me that my future might be a little bit spoiled if I don't study.
Okay, so I cut that question a little bit short, but the theme of the question is you're overthinking and feeling anxious about not studying enough. And this sort of thing, in my opinion, invites us to see a sort of expanded worldview in which, tomorrow's not guaranteed. And there's a balance between effort and detachment. Too much effort will actually end up ruining our chances of whatever we were trying to do. And also, I would question, what are you looking to get out of, this said studying? What's the end goal? What do you really want? So these are all things to take into account because also oftentimes we feel anxiety because over certain things like studying because we feel like our back is against the wall. We feel as though if we pass this test, our life is over, but you have to zoom out a lot. Zoom out a lot, like even more than you initially think. See that life itself is much grander and much more wide than just the scope of your school or your immediate goals. And in reality, that, you know, your life isn't over if you fail that one test, if you miss that one assignment, even if you fail that class, whatever that may be. These are sort of probably the worst case scenarios that are sort of playing in your mind, that your life isn't over. You can always start again. You can always try again. And just when that sort of voice creeps up, that anxiety and those overthinking thoughts, just sort of zoom out. Zoom out. Look at the world. Look at how many people exist. See the craziness of life and the unexpected twists and turns you've already experienced in your life. Think about what you hold really dear, the laughs with friends, your family. Just widen the scope and breathe through that widening and that sort of external view. Hopefully that helps. That's a little bit of a tricky question because I don't want to dive too deep into personal questions, but hopefully that could be of some help.
Hi, thank you for accepting. My question is, how do I navigate becoming my true self when I've been a version of everyone else's expectations since my childhood? I feel like I'm having an identity crisis. I am having an identity crisis.
Here's what's interesting about that question. You mentioned, how do I navigate sort of finding my true self when I've almost been the person that everyone else has expected and wanted me to be for so long? Well, I'll sort of mirror that question back to you. And who would you be if you knew that everyone around you would support you regardless of how you projected yourself? Who would you be? How would you dress? How would you speak? What hobbies would you have? Where would you go? What would you do for a living? What would you tell people your purpose is? What are you afraid to say right now? So all of these questions are worth meditating on. And it depends how relentless you want to be with experiencing your soul and the sort of expression of your consciousness. How much do you want to experience? Because consciousness will take you past any limits you believe that you have. So ask those questions. If I knew everyone around me is willing to drop their opinion of who I am now and accept whatever version of me I bring to the table tomorrow, then who would I be? And that, I think, draws us and brings us closer to a great representation of our true essence and maybe even our soul.
I've been following you for now like 2 to 3 years, and you've helped me go through very dark times. So thank you so much for your posts and insights. And this begs the question for me, what could you have possibly gone through to take you personally on that route of mindfulness, consciousness, self-improvement, if you want to call it like that? Uh, you can, of course, generalize, like you don't have to specifically say what happened in your life, but what was the situation? What moved you towards this path?
I'm probably not going to get into specifics, but I think this is a great gateway question to address a different topic. Of course, I've been through some stuff in my life. People have been through worse. People have been through less. And I probably will go through more stuff in my life in which people will go through more and people will go through less. And I don't think that is necessarily a metric for understanding our brain, our mind, and even philosophy and spirituality in a sense. And I think when we hold on to the idea that we must suffer to learn is not necessarily true. Though the statement itself, suffering does provide learning, is true, we don't need to suffer to learn. It's up to us. How willing are we to truly exist in the embodiment of the states that we want to exist in? How relentless are we in practicing and applying the methods that we're learning? And I think that's something I always took very sort of seriously, is that I didn't want to just ponder. I wanted to see, okay, how far can I take this? How far can I take this mental practice? And I want to take it far enough until it's proven to me it works or it doesn't work. And I want to see real results in my reality. I want to see my actual life change, and I will not stop until I see change in my life. And whether it's this practice or that practice, I know that the constant force that is me is capable of changing and trying and doing whatever. So I wouldn't say necessarily, what have I had to go through to sort of exist in the openness that I exist in now, but rather, what is holding everyone back, and what belief are many people holding on to that restricts them from seeing things in a grander and more powerful perspective.
Hey, I hope you're doing well and all. So I've been struggling with trying to find a sense of purpose, or just sort of what I should be doing on this planet, if that makes sense, like livelihood wise or hobbies, or just what my calling is. I've tried lots of different hobbies, lots of different jobs, and I've found stuff I can sort of survive doing, or just about get by doing and be content somewhat with. But I'm yet to sort of find something that really speaks to me, or it feels like what I'm meant to be doing, or it feels fulfilling. My question is, what sort of advice would you give to somebody in that position who's trying to find that sort of sense of purpose? Or what would you do if you were sort of in that position?
I can't speak to direct advice on purpose because purpose looks different for everyone. But what I would do if I were, say, in a different circumstance, if I was a different person, and I guess all I had was before I knew I was going to be in that path was they would say, Kinzer, what sort of intention, what perspective do you want to carry with you? I would say, take a break from searching and finding for purpose and emphasize life experience and sort of inner satisfaction and happiness without needing an external purpose. I do believe an external purpose can serve us. I do believe we can serve the world in a certain manner, but I don't believe it's always in the ways that we think. Sometimes your very happiness, sometimes your very journey is a purpose in itself. And a lot of times we need to let go of the idea and the principle of external purpose to find something even deeper within ourselves. And maybe whatever we end up finding within ourselves over however many weeks, months, years ends up being our purpose. So if I were talking to me and I was in those shoes, I would say take a break from searching for purpose and maybe indulge and invite yourself to experiencing life in ways that make you feel fulfilled, not in a purposeful way, but just in a warm, fuzzy, happy way.
My question is there a difference between success and fulfillment?
I definitely believe there is a difference between the two. And I think a lot of it comes down to perspective. You know, we're very big on hating on material success in the spiritual community. And I think we forget to acknowledge that the universe itself, in reality, it's not bound by any principles of success. And what we'll find is, for some people, paradoxically, their success does fulfill them. You know, we're very quick to say, oh, that job can't fulfill you. You need to meditate for a year. Well, that's not necessarily true, because the whole point of meditation is to expose and open ourselves to the understanding that there's no set rules and that each person's journey is different, and we have to respect that. So, especially when we're looking at our own journey, if we're bound by the sort of rules that we like to apply to others, we'll understand and we'll see that we're extremely limited. You know, maybe that material thing will bring you some sort of fulfillment. Maybe it will allow you to search deeper within yourself and to explore your inner universe. Of course, we know and we would like to believe and think that fulfillment is an inner state, which it is, but I think it would be relatively negligent to believe that material possessions, in whatever form they may come, can't sort of expose and open us to a greater exploration of our mind and of our spiritual journey and growth. And a lot of things come from definitions. For example, fulfillment. What do we mean? Do we mean satisfaction with life? Because I think there's a lot of people that are satisfied with their lives. They're not necessarily waiting for that next vacation. They're not necessarily waiting to meet that next person. They're okay with what they have. They're not jumping out of the roof happy. And would you call that fulfillment? Or do we call a yogi in the Himalayan mountains who has meditated for 10 to 20 years and reached what many call enlightenment? Do we call that fulfillment? Depends on your definition. And of course, it depends on your definition of success as well, because some people may consider fulfillment the success of life, and some people may consider leaving a legacy or a destiny behind, whatever it may be. Some people may consider that purpose. It's all the way in which we're choosing to see things. And we have to understand that the way we're seeing things is creating the narrative we tell ourselves about our life and how our brain will respond and sort of how reality and the universe will sort of bend around to meet us where we're at. There's not set in stone principles that are rigid and must be followed to sort of distinguish the two.